I would like to welcome tonight Mario Carpo and Matias del Campo for the launch, the book launch of the book of Matias del Campo, but done together with Mario Carpo. So we're going to switch this around, right? Like this is going to be the whole evening. Book, as you can see here, is called Neural Architecture, Design and Artificial Intelligence. Matias is a registered architect, designer, and educator, an associate professor at the Taubman School of Architecture and Urban Planning, the University of Michigan, and is also the director of AR2IL. The Architecture and Artificial Intelligence Laboratory, you got that in my head. So Matias just, off track, he just asked me whether these used to be bookshelves, and so that got in my head because I was like, really? And it could be, right? So anyway, we're doing this book launch in something that might have been once a library, but his lab is actually a laboratory. And that's also at Michigan. In his lecture, Neural Architecture, Design and Artificial Intelligence, Matias will provide an opportunity to survey the emerging field of architecture and artificial intelligence and to reflect on the implications of a world increasingly entangled in the questions of the agency, culture, and ethics of AI. You probably all, and if you didn't, I hope you did, but you probably all saw his Arcadia lecture, which was amazing and very much an example of where that could go. As the author of Neural Architecture, he is currently exploring specific applications of AI in contemporary architecture, focusing on the relationship to material and symbolic culture. AI has experienced explosive growth in recent years, as you all very much know, in a range of fields, including architecture, but its implications for the humanistic values that distinguish architecture from technology have yet to be measured. Following his lecture, Matias will have a discussion with Mario, who is the Reyner Banham Professor of Architecture in History and Theory at the Bartlett School of Architecture in London, and is also Professor of Architectural Theory at the Angewandte in Vienna. After studying architecture and history in Italy, Dr. Carpo was an assistant professor at the University of Geneva in Switzerland, and in 1993 received tenure in France, where he was the first assigned to the École d'Architecture in the Saint-Étienne, then to the École d'Architecture de Paris de la Villette, and more recently to the École d'Architecture de Paris Malaquais. Wow, that's a lot. Yeah, that's a lot. You just moved the door over. Okay. He was the head of study center at the Canadian Center of Architecture in Montreal with Phyllis from 2002 to 2006, and the Vincent Scully visiting professor of architecture history at the Yale School of Architecture from 2010 to 2014, and then back in 2017. I can't say how much I look forward to the discussion and the talk by Matias del Campo first, and then, yeah, we'll see how the discussion goes. Thank you both for joining us, and welcome at Penn.
Thank you very much, Winka, for this really generous introduction to the lecture and event today. I'm going to keep the talk shorter than usual, because I would like to have really time to discuss with Mario. I think this is probably the more interesting, might be the more interesting element of the night. So the book Neural Architecture, Design and Artificial Intelligence is of course based on the book you have seen now running through several minutes. Mario Carpo was so kind to contribute the introduction to the book that tells the story of Zeuxis and how he was commissioned to create a statue of Venus. And to do that, he basically made a data set of beautiful women, I would say. That's, I think, Mario's argument too. And what it tells us about how we architects are using AI is the idea to learn from the architectural history through the application and construction of data sets, features that might be useful for us as architects, moving forward in our contemporary age. And so the book basically discusses ideas of how features can be learned, how features can be trained, how AI systems can be applied to an architectural design. But beyond the technical elements, like what is a CNN, what is a GAN, how does it operate, it also discusses aspects of what does have style to do with this? How do we basically understand that style is part of our tradition as architects, and it's coming back through the discussions on AI. What does it mean for authorship? What does it mean for agency? What does it mean for sensibility? Like all these elements that are part of our profession are experiencing a change in its perception and application in design tasks through the use of neural networks and even newer methodologies such as energy-based models or diffusion models. There's also a large portion discussing whether AI can be creative or not. I'll keep it short, no. Also delves into early experiments on using language as a driving design force in architectural design through methodologies in AI that can use language to create imagery. And all of you have seen and worked already with diffusion models, Midjourney, DALL-E, and so on. The method described in the book is a little bit older because it came up before these models were available. It's actually an attentional GAN, but I'm going to go into detail with that in a second. Importantly, the end of the book also discusses the political implications of using AI in architecture. What happens with low-skilled labor, for example, in construction sites? What happens with like simple applications in AI, in architecture? Are they going to be completely automatized? I don't think I have answers for all of those points, but it was important to me that the book asks these questions, and hopefully somebody else will also chime in and maybe think about those problems that are coming up with this new technology. So in short, neural networks basically, or neural architecture, which the whole book is based on, deals with the problem of using neural networks as a legitimate design method in architecture design and as a tool of interrogation for the entire history of our discipline in order to mine these large big data sets for possibilities for us to learn and apply to new designs. New is kind of a dangerous word. It's a very difficult word to describe, specifically when it is about using neural networks, because it's very questionable that neural networks can come up with something new at all. But it might inspire us humans to come up with something new. And I think that's one of the most important elements here. Let's ask the biggest question in the room, which is why use AI at all? There's a very short answer to this, which is basically it's better to teach machines how to learn instead of how to do things. It's better to teach machines how to learn instead of how to do things. So what do I mean by that? You might have seen videos like this before. This is basically how cars were made until the late 1960s. You have a set of people, experts in what they're doing. They know how to weld a car together. They know how to paint a car. They know how to assemble the car. It's a huge amount of people putting those pieces together, which of course means that they have to have a certain expertise to know how to do that, right? 1967 was the introduction of the first industrial robot on an assembly line of cars, which was the Unimate robot introduced by General Motors in one of their plants close to here in New Jersey, actually. Was the first robot on an assembly line. That changed the game, of course, and it led to this here. Many of you have seen those videos before, large assembly lines of robots putting together cars, welding them together. So you have to think about it. From 1967 to today, the car industry have collected millions and millions of data points of where to weld a car, right? And because you have this large amount of data, you can actually change the whole concept. So before that, before AI or before neural networks, every single time the car model was changed, every one of you who has worked with a robot knows that there's a pendant that literally allows you to teach a robot specific movements and motions and actions in space. This is exactly what happens here. Somebody trained this robot. Here is a point where you need to weld this car together, and this is only valuable, usable for this one car model. However, because we have these millions and millions and millions of data points, it means we can do something different. Instead of teaching a robot one by one for every different model how to weld it together, we can teach a robot how to weld. Understand what welding is. What is a good point to weld? And it's possible because of this large data set, which means that every single car that comes along that assembly line now can be different. It doesn't matter for the robot because it learned how to weld, not how to weld a specific model. That changes the game entirely. Now, for a less technical approach to what we're seeing these days is the rise of neural art. You might have seen this painting before, the portrait of Bertrand de Bellamy from the Paris-based art collective Obvious. It became notoriously famous because it sold for almost $430-something thousand at Christie's. I don't think that's the most important part of it, that it sold for this much money. I think the more important part of it is the questions that came along when this image was published. Who's the author here? Is it the art collective that came up with the idea to use a neural network? Is it the programmer who actually programmed the neural network? Or is it the hundreds or maybe thousands of artists present in the data set that was used to generate this image? So authorship starts to dilute. It starts to disappear. But it's an interesting question to ask about why are we so obsessed with authorship anyways? Yeah? Maybe we have to change that. So around 2018, this is about the same time that painting was sold, a series of neural artists appeared. This is Sofia Crespo, for example, here. And it does not only be important for the visual arts. AI made an impact in the visual arts, in music, in poetry. Like this is the work, for example, here of Mario Klingemann, who I consider one of the more interesting characters in terms of AI art, who created a data set of portraits from the 15th century to the 19th century, and then generated these new images that are somehow strange and weird and have like these three eyes, and they are an embodiment of what I would describe as estrangement. And there is also the collaboration between visual artists and musicians. For example, in this case, this is the LA-based band Yacht, who also generates the music using neural networks, by the way, and AI, in collaboration with Mario Klingemann, who provided the video. So there's like a whole ecology of new cultural production happening at the moment that is relying on artificial intelligence as a driver of an artistic idea. Around the same time, we started to create our own first data sets. This is a latent walk through a data set of Gothic architecture. Also a little story about creating data sets. I used scraping to do this data set, which basically is a short Python code that allows you to scrape the internet for particular images. And when I created this data set, the first time I scraped the internet, I actually looked for goth images. And you can imagine how that data set turned out. Like about 90% of the data set was not usable for our purposes. So, which shows, by the way, how much human intervention is still necessary to get a data set that operates in the area that you are interested into observing. So what does it mean for architects when we are suddenly operating in an ecology that can be described as an ecology of post-human design, where the field of, well, let me put it this way, it's not a pyramid anymore where we as humans are on the top of the design or creation or creative endeavor, but we have rather a field, a flat plateau, where you have different players at the same time. They can be human, they can be post-human, they can be computational, they can be also animal, they can be plant. So there's like a variety of different players at the same time contributing to a specific idea of design. We actually started creating these sections 2018, where we created data sets of plans and sections and tried to figure out whether we can get an AI to generate any form of plan. And I was really excited the first time I saw these results. I was like, great, we can automatize section making. Fantastic, I don't have to care about that anymore. But you all are experts, you're all architects. If you look closer into the sections and those plans, you're gonna figure out pretty quickly that they make no sense whatsoever. They are imitations of what a section or a plan could look like, but they lack the semantic information to make it usable as a plan or a section that contributes to an organization within a building. So what I'm trying to say with this is those data sets are good in imitating something. They can make something that looks like a section or looks like a plan, but they do not have the intelligence to make them really work as a plan. It's a big, big difference. Doesn't mean that it's impossible. It's just this is one of the steps to getting there, so to speak. Let me talk a little bit about a theoretical element of the book, which is the introduction or the discussion on concepts such as estrangement and defamiliarization, as for example defined by people like Victor Schlovsky or also present in Bert Brecht's work, and Sigmund Freud is also part of this whole gang here. So Victor Schlovsky basically defined the concept of estrangement in a paper in 1917 called Art as Technique, where he describes that the introduction of abstraction into everyday situations or objects can increase the attention of the observer to that object. So in this case, for example, we have a data set of brutalist buildings. This is a latent walk through the data set. And on the right side, it's the same data set, but we introduced very primitively a data set of Picasso paintings. And the moment that you do that, there is this, you can, as architects, you're all experts here, recognize this, these are some sort of buildings, right? These are some sort of designs. But on the other hand, you have that introduction of abstraction through, very literally speaking, introducing Picasso here, that adds this moment of estrangement. It's familiar, but strange, or strange but familiar enough, so to say. Estrangement is not a new concept. I mean, there was, Friedrich Hegel talked about this, Karl Marx talked about estrangement, Victor Schlovsky I mentioned already, and Bertolt Brecht introduced those in his plays, where he, for example, showed Mutter Courage, and in the play, for example, there's the wagon, which looks very realistic. It's a 17th century wagon, and there is no background. You see the brick wall of the theater. So we basically like exposing the observer of the theater play to a moment of estrangement. Yes, I can see that wagon, it's from the 17th century. The play is based in the 17th century, but I see like the modern mechanics of the theater behind it. Sigmund Freud is also somebody that needs to be mentioned when it's about estrangement. He wrote in 1918 an essay called Das Unheimliche, The Uncanny, where he also described a similar effect to what Victor Schlovsky is describing, that basically when we feel uncanny when we see something that is familiar to us, but it contains a strange element. Graham Harman, not the biggest fan of Graham Harman, but there's one book that I really like, which is Lovecraft and Philosophy, where he describes the situation, for example, that Lovecraft describes a person that is very familiar to another person, like the cousin or the sister or brother, and suddenly this person opens its mouth and his voice is monstrous. So you see something that is familiar to you, but this moment of estrangement really gives you that uncanny feeling. This is an image I like to show when it comes to how this effect actually can be played out in architecture. As architects, all of you will recognize features in this image that are very familiar to you. Fensterbänder, rectangular features, cantilevering elements, and so on. So those are all things that you can recognize as being part of a specific architectural canon. But on the other hand, there are things here that are completely unclear. Like, how is the relationship to the ground? Is it growing out of the ground? Is it carved out of the ground? Is it melting into the ground? These are all things that we don't clearly recognize, and thus actually contribute to this sensation of estrangement. Same with the roof. Is it broken? Was it bombed? Is it destroyed? Is it intentionally done like that? Like, all those things are creating a certain amount of attention that we give to this image in order to understand the situation that we're actually perceiving. All of these, by the way, are elements that can also be read about in neuroscience. Yeah, like the way how we perceive things, how we actually pay attention to things or don't pay attention to them. So, and by the way, like, neuroscience is the whole basis for pretty much every application in AI these days. I've made the argument in the book that this is the first genuinely 21st century design method. And yes, this is quite a bold statement, but I'll try to somehow make an argument why. If you think about, I mean, maybe it should be rather said like first genuinely 21st century computational design method, because my argument is that all the methods that we have been using in computational design until very recently were already developed in the 20th century. Polygon modeling, NURBS modeling, agent-based modeling, parametricism, like all of those things existed already in the end of the 90s. They were just refined and perfected in the last 20-something years. But what we see today emerging as a methodology of design based on AI is really a paradigmatic shift, because these technologies did not even exist 10 years ago. Maybe the theoretical basis for those existed already, but the technology was not there yet, the algorithms were not there yet, the data sets didn't exist, which, by the way, is still a problem today for architecture. We don't have enough data sets. So this is my argument why this is truly a new paradigm in architectural design. A couple of quick examples where these things and ideas were applied. The robot garden was a commission from the University of Michigan, from the robotics department. They built a new building, the so-called Ford Robotics building, and next to this building, they wanted a test ground for their robots. And the director of robotics came to us and said, I know you guys have been working on ideas of how to apply basically what is our daily bread, machine vision, feature recognition, and so on, as a design method. Can you apply that to a design of a test ground for our robots? And they made some requirements. So the requirements were, it has to have several different ground conditions, it has to have steps in various sizes and lengths, and it has to have a water feature. And the water feature, the idea behind it is that they want to flood the whole thing in winter so that it freezes and they can run their robots on ice skating robots, so to speak. And so Alexandra Carlson, who was a PhD student at robotics at the time, assisted us in creating a technique where we collected thousands of satellite images with various ground conditions and geological features. And then we applied a series of different AI methods. So it's not just one method, it's not just one thing, it's a concatenation of different methods. So it includes style transferring, style gun 2, and 2D to 2D, 2D to 2D style transfer I mentioned already, 2D to 3D style transferring, and deep dreaming. So this was like a whole melange of different things that we tried to apply there. We did a series of tests to understand or to try to see if it can really do what it is supposed to do. We created also a data set of fountains, columns, and stairs. And this was the basis for deep dreaming onto that side, a variety of different features. So the posts you see were actually a result of the deep dreaming of columns. Why do they need those specific features? What they're testing in this ground is basically the so-called last 100-step problem. They want to have robots that deliver goods to your home. And the most difficult part from that journey is the last 100 steps from the delivery van to your door. Because it can have different ground conditions. It can be gravel, it can be sand, it can be concrete. Sometimes it has steps, sometimes not. The steps might be different. So they're testing that on this site. I love actually this view here. I've shown like a random machine vision video normally here, but I'm happy that robotics actually provided me this video of how machines perceive the world. Like, how does a robot see its environment? And we are here again with this whole idea of estrangement. Yeah? It's something that it is different, so exotically different to how we see the world as humans. That, but on the other hand, it's so logic, it's so mathematic, it's so engineered, right? But still, it can produce a very specific aesthetic quality. And this is something I'm quite fascinated with. I don't know what to do with it yet, but something I'm going to do with it. So this is a part of the data set for satellite images. Some of the deep dreaming experiments on the lower part. I'm going to jump over this so that we can make this a bit shorter, but I wanted to show this one. This one was one of the strangest results we got, and I really love it because it's how I think maybe machines understand architecture or see architecture. I have to be very careful with things like how machines understand architecture or how they think about architecture, because AI does not think, yeah? And AI does not really understand. We understand. But it can be really good in terms of providing strange features. It's, at the end of the day, what we sometimes perceive as creativity coming from AI is nothing but us humans creatively interpreting what's coming out of those systems. Elephant in the room, text-to-image generators, like everyone is using Midjourney, including this gentleman here. So if this is already part of late-night talks, it's clear that AI and text-to-image generators are part of mainstream, yeah? Which is great, it's good. As long as those things are discussed, we can make progress. I like to use this quote here when it comes to text-to-image generators. The limits of my language means the limit of my world, by Ludwig Wittgenstein in his Tractatus Logico-Philosophicum from 1921. Yes, I'm aware that you can use images now also as part of the prompt in text-to-image generators, but this still applies even if you're using images, because you have to know which images you use and how to use them. So one of the early attempts we did in using text-to-image generation was a competition 2020 for a high school project in Shenzhen in China, where we used parts of the program mentioned in the competition brief in combination with a surreal twist, let me put it that way. So we had prompts that said, for example, this is the gym, it has 2,000 square meters, it has 2 basketball courts, it has changing rooms, and it's standing on canary yellow legs. And those created these very colorful images here. This was a first attempt, you have to understand, so it's not perfect. But as Alberto already said, nothing new is perfect. So what we did was basically creating those color images and then taking those color patches and extruding them using very simply and primitively Grasshopper. And then what we noticed here was what we learned in this process, which was important to us, was that we understood that those neural networks are not able to create the interior and exterior at the same time. So you can do either the exterior or the interior, but not both simultaneously, at least not at that time. So what we did was, okay, we decided we're just going to create the exterior, and we're going to create the interior very pragmatically, like straight, simple, as simple as it gets. As I said, this was a competition entry. It was just for us more a learning process. We like to compete in competitions rather as an experiment to understand how to apply a new method to designing a whole design and building. I think we got either third or fourth. I don't remember exactly which place we got. But I still like to show it because it's a good example of really this sort of combination between research work and then applying that to a concrete architectural project. The emergence of diffusion models was a very important change that happened last year. So this was about January last year when I stumbled upon something called disco diffusion. I am an avid follower of chat rooms of media artists because they're most of the time the first one to find those things. And in one of those, somebody mentioned disco diffusion, and I looked at it and was like, okay, great, I can use that. And one of the first things was this sort of endless plan generator. So why do we architects like those text-to-image generators so much? It really exploded into the architecture scene, right? I think it has to do with the fact that it somehow caters to our tradition of working through variations. So these here are 28 models created in the office of Hans Hollein in 2004, trying to iteratively work through the problem of balancing volumes for a high-res project. So this was all manual, this was all like handmade and so on. But what Midjourney and those things do is basically you do a prompt, it gives you 4 variations. And that possibility of variations is, I think, what made it so obsessively to us architects. I did a little math. It's a little bit old now, yeah, but I calculated that from late March, April last year to August, I generated 74,000 images in Midjourney. And I'm not even a power user. But this ability to work through variations over and over again and really getting obsessed about it, moving further and further and further, deeper into the rabbit hole of finding something interesting in there, mining for something valuable, so to speak, in terms of design, is what creates this obsession. And I warn every single student I have about that actually Midjourney can be addictive. So just be clear about that. Okay, just very quickly, how do diffusion models actually work? Or how did they arrive on the scene? 2015, we had enough annotated data to do something like annotated data, meaning images that were labeled with, this is a sculpture, this is a person, this is a bridge, this is whatever, yeah? A lamp, that we could do the following, so-called automated image captioning. So instead of having somebody write the caption for this image, you could automate it and it would create a caption saying, people walking on a bridge. That's what it sees in this image. Now somebody came up with the idea, what happens if we turn it around? If we give them first people walking on a bridge and let an algorithm create the image, which is a very common method, by the way, in computer science, to just turn around things and see what happens. Deep dreaming works exactly the same way. This person was Elman Mansinov and his colleagues at Amazon Web Services, and they immediately also published a paper called Generating Images from Captions with Attention. And this is an interesting, these images were the first ones they actually did in this paper. And they used prompts like, a stop sign is flying in blue skies, or a herd of elephants flying in the blue skies, or a toilet seat sits open in the grass fields. With a lot of imagination and squinting your eyes, you might be able to see that. The reason why those images are so bad, but still work, by the way, is because at that time, the only resolution you can use to do that was 72 by 72 pixels. And you cannot do a lot with that. What they do, these diffusion models, is basically they introduce noise iteratively into the images that are in the data set until it's only noise, random noise. And then they take the random noise and they can organize those pixels according to your prompt. So basically, I prompted here a villa in the Alps, and it creates that villa in the Alps. This is a little bit more of a detailed description of this. I'm not going to bore you with this because this is more like a technical part of it. There's a whole paper about this if you want to read that up. But let's see what it means for architecture. Let's use a prompt like Mies van der Rohe building. So what this does is basically open all doors for lazy architects to just imitate and copy stuff in a very lazy and unimaginative way. And I've seen this. I'm not going to say names, yeah, but I've seen exactly that, Mies van der Rohe buildings, yeah. Then how can you use it to do other things like section drawing through an opera house? And this is also interesting in order to see the development of these models from Midjourney version 2, which was, this image was created in May last year, or several of those. And of course, I mean, at the first look, it looks interesting and different. It's not a working opera house section, for sure, but it can be inspiring to, you know, as a starting point for a possible design that you want to do. Now, the same prompt, section drawing for an opera house, done last November with the new version of Midjourney version 4. This, for me, is rather disappointing, I have to say, because it turns from something that has enough estrangement and variation and possibilities for you to imagine something interesting to basically the Disney version of an opera, yeah? So Midjourney is very good in creating cliches, and you have to be very careful how to use it in order to avoid that. How about this here? The most beautiful house in the world. What do you think AI thinks is the most beautiful house in the world? This is the version from May last year. All right? So now the new version, the most beautiful house in the world. I had to try it again. So this is again from November last year, same question. The most beautiful house in the world. So I have to say that when I see those images, I'm not worried about architecture. I'm not worried about architects. Yeah, because AI obviously has no taste whatsoever. Okay, so we did, at the very beginning, I did a bunch of really fun experiments like a hairy villa, Le Corbusier house made of Kobe beef, a scaly house, a house made of feathers, and so on and so forth, which was really fun to try because you can do like really weird stuff, which I like. I mean, I'm talking about estrangement and stuff like that, so I like it. And a lot of, you know, facade experiments that became very popular last year, and tons of alpine villas. I don't know, I must have something with doing a villa in the Alps. But it is getting better. Like these are new sections, they're rather new, yeah? and they still make no sense, yeah? But they still, they're even better in inspiring you as the user to do something interesting, innovative, different, yeah? There were already a couple of exhibitions that showed this kind of work. So this one, I think, was the first exhibition that showed any sort of diffusion model work, which was called Strange, and was in Fort Worth, Texas, last April, I think. And we did one at Taubman College recently, which was not necessarily just diffusion models, but a lot of the work exhibited was based on diffusions. We have people like Corey Beek, and you see here, I think there's Kyle Steinfeld, and Immanuel Coe, Benjamin Annemoser, Sandra Manning in the foreground, our Dean Macy there on the left side, and Daniel Bolochen. Another example, this is not diffusion based. This is a project that is based on StyleGun 2, which was all of these things that we saw before are all pixel based, are just images, right? Like, how do you get that to become 3D? How do you get that to become a model? Like something you can really work with. So we had this project on the Marienhofstraße in Vienna for the Generali Center. It's one of the most important shopping streets in Vienna. And we created a data set of brutalist buildings and trained a neural network to create a latent walk through that data set to give us exactly those elements we're interested into, like something that, yes, it reminds you somehow of brutalist buildings, but it's not necessarily a copy or an imitation. Yeah? And if you look closer into the latent walk, you can find things that are useful, provocative, different. The one thing they do is provoke you in understanding how that massing on the side can be executed. Oh, sorry, I didn't want to do that. Let me go a little bit further in the video here. Whoop. Yeah, here we are. Sorry for that. So the question here is then, okay, you get those images, so how do you basically create a model out of that? And we devised a method that it's called a pixel projection, where basically you can create high contrast images out of the data set and then basically intersect them to create a three-dimensional model out of it. And that method actually turned out to be quite useful. Funny enough, it also kind of solved a little bit of the problem we had before of it cannot do interior and exterior at the same time. It did things that were useful in the interior. And then it's basically, again, the human intervention necessary to polish this project enough so that it becomes a viable architectural project that has also things like elevators, toilets, and staircases, because AI doesn't do those yet. So basically what you see here, like all these elements that we basically pulled out of the model here are all the things that we had to add on top of what we were given by the neural network. And a more recent project is the Deep House 2, similar technique. This was an interesting project. It's actually for a neurologist, an Austrian neurologist who has a site in the Alps. And he heard about the work that we're doing, and he said, like, I heard you guys are using, insights from neuroscience to do projects, and he wanted definitely something with that. He just had one requirement. He said, I want to do the house, but it has to be a mid-century modern house. Yeah, okay, good. So we did a data set again, where we extract features for plans and elevations. And then with the same method that I showed before for the Generali Center, we created the house. And this, for now, is the most successful approach we had to that problem, because every single element you see in the interior of this house was generated using the results from that pixel projection. So we didn't have to add anything to this one. We just had maybe to move things a little bit up and down, but that was it. The kitchen block was there, benches, sleeping rooms, and so on and so forth. So all the things are there, and we're moving forward with this project. What I like about this project is that it definitely has those sort of mid-century modern features, but on the other hand, it has things that a mid-century modern architect would never do. Like these strange corroded walls that are breaking away. I mean, all the things are not practical in the sense that a modern architect would think, but it provides to the whole atmosphere of the building or to the estrangement of the interior. So I'm coming to an end here now. Just briefly, I also founded something called the Neural Architecture Group, together with Immanuel Coe and Daniel Bolochen, and in the meantime we have a couple of other members. We try to meet regularly on Zoom to discuss ideas and concepts and progresses and failures that we've had. There is a website, aiarchitects.org, where we are continuously collecting different positions on AI and architecture. We're continuously adding more people to this, so come back occasionally to see what's happening there. And then the ARI laboratory, the Architecture and Artificial Intelligence Laboratory, which is rather concerned with more pragmatic problems for architectural design. So for example, we're working on automated plan generation, 3D model data sets, 2D model data sets. We are working on machine vision for demolition of buildings using robots. So these sort of really more pragmatic problems for architecture design. This is the website. And there is the Remeshing-AI YouTube channel where you can find a lot of lectures, but also some workshops and tutorials for using several AI methods. So this was about the book. Yeah, we don't have books here tonight, but I can tell you that Oro was so kind to give us a code which is valid until March 9th for 30% off with the book. Yeah, that's the shameless plug part now. Yeah. The code is Neural23, and if you go to the Oro Editions website, you can order it from them directly. There's also Machine Hallucinations, which I had the pleasure to co-edit with Neil Leach, and this is coming this fall, Architecture in the Age of Intelligent Machines. So you have to understand that the Neural Architecture book and this one are basically bookends. The Neural Architecture, I would describe it as Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Yeah? So if the Neural Architecture book is Mr. Hyde, who deals with things like authorship, agency, sensibilities, and so on, this one here is Dr. Jekyll, who basically deals with the math and the algorithms and the code behind that. Yeah? Yes, thank you very much. Thank you for listening. Yeah. Almost.
So, thank you for the presentation. I presume I have to ask questions now. It's not one, right? Where do I start? First of all, I presume with a disclaimer, because anything we are going to say tonight may be outdated tomorrow. Yes, right? Things have been changing so fast since last summer that any argument on artificial intelligence may be unmade by software released tomorrow morning at 10:30. I received 2 weeks ago the proofs of an article I wrote last summer when Midjourney had only just started to be generally available, and it's already unreadable. By the time it is printed, in 6 months, it will be a museum piece. So what can we do? The paradox is that artificial intelligence is a very old idea and a very old technology. It has been around since 1956. And since the inception, artificial intelligence always promised more than it could deliver. So much so that at some point it was put into the dustbin of technical history, and people thought of artificial intelligence as if it were a colossal practical joke. In the 70s, 80s, 90s, the project of artificial intelligence was completely forgotten. Last summer, unexpectedly, artificial intelligence started to deliver way more than it ever promised. Way more than people expected, and more than most people even wanted. Which is why everyone, as you have shown, is freaking out. The paradox is that this tsunami of generative AI is very viable. The reboot, almost the vindication of the original project of artificial intelligence. What artificial intelligence was always meant to be. 1960 or 61, Martin Minsky, first paper on definition of artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is a general problem-solving machine based on heuristic programming and coarse search, which means basically massive trial and error. The idea is that computers should keep trying and refocusing and try again and refocus, and in this, massive randomized trial and error, it becomes a general problem-solving machine. After a few years, it became evident that the computers of the time couldn't really work, which is why the project was abandoned. But 10 or 12 years ago, it became evident that using today's computers, big data, brute force computing, etc., that project could be revived. If a computer can make 1 million, billion, trillion, gazillion trials in 1 second, trial and error, which is a very wasteful, time-consuming strategy, becomes a viable computational strategy. This is why artificial intelligence restarted and was reborn. For visual, now we don't call it connectionist anymore, we call it machine learning. But the spirit is the same. Now, for image processing, the tipping point, as you have mentioned, comes around 2014, 15, 16. GAN and style transfer. For what I understand of these things, the logic of GAN and style transfer, as it has been commented upon largely in the last 5 or 6 years, is the following. You build a huge data set of images of dogs, for example. And then, by comparison, selection, formalization, generalization, and abstraction, which is what humans would do, but is in fact by aggregating and averaging, that's what computers do, the machine extrapolates from this data set the idea of the perfect dog, the ideal dog, the uber dog, the archetypal dog. And with this super dog, the ideal, the special dog, we can do several things. Ask the machine, is this a dog? Compare and match. Generate endless, realistically similar but different dogs. Or combine. Combine one data set and another and make a new animal which is 80% dog and 20% cat. No, but 80% dog and 20% coyote. And this is the foundation of GAN are generated by artificial intelligence the last 5 or 6 years. In this framework, the tsunami of generative AI, which exploded last year, is not particularly interesting. It is basically more of the same, but for what we do, for the design profession, it is a step backward, because it is based on generic data sets, which for what we do are not specific enough. If we want to work with that stuff, we need to create for each project a data set which is custom made. If you just use generic data set, what you do is an opinion. This is what the internet thinks of the ideal beautiful house. Now, one thing has to be granted you, probably more than one thing. You started working on this before all the hula baloo of last year. You've been on it for several years. And so you felt, in a sense, you felt it coming, which many people didn't. For example, I didn't. So I'm here to be persuaded. And let me say, the lawyer, the devil's advocate, the devil's advocate. So you have to persuade me that we can actually do with this technology, not the text and images prompt, but the actual serious way of working with specific custom-made data set. We can do something which is going to infiltrate the daily practice of what we do. And I can see some, conceptual consequences, not practical, but implication of this new methodology, which is the story I told in the press that I wrote for the book, but it was 2 years ago, which is almost, another continent. But what emerges, what is emerging, I felt it 2 years ago, and now it's validated by what I see happening in schools where I go, is that two terms which have been the core of art theory since the beginning of historical times, style and imitation, which 50 years ago we were told to eliminate from our theory and from our practice. Imitation and style have been cancelled by art theory, art criticism, design theory, architectural theory. As of the 70s, taboo. You should not mention it. I was trained in the late 70s, and they never used any of this term. Actually, you might probably use them when I was young. Someone told me, if you mention this term again, I'm going to, fire you, something like that. And so this term disappeared. But they disappeared hypocritically, because we cannot say imitation, but think of how many euphemisms, synonyms, circumlocutions we are still using to replace that word we cannot use. Even worse, style, the S word. It's taboo. You should never mention it in a school of architecture, in a school of design, in a department of art history, unless you're an archaeologist. You should not. But then how many synonyms we use to refer to the same, the classical tradition knew that every art is to some extent imitation of something. Imitation of nature, imitation of the style of another art, system of criterion. For visual art, Bazar, they call it man, but it is the same meaning. In the 19th century, that's a story that you tell in the book, it was the foundation of the new discipline of art history in Germanic countries and in the rest of Europe. As of the 70s, these two terms have been obliterated from the theory and practice of the design profession. Surprise, surprise. What we kicked out of the door is coming back in from the windows of computer science. Computer scientists, engineers, they don't know that these words are so loaded with meaning in the history of art, criticism, and design, and philosophy, and epistemology. They just try, they're engineers. They don't know about the history, right? And so they just try to write algorithms which imitate some function of the human brain. And by doing so, with the naivete which characterized the profession, they thought that imitation and style is the words they use. And so for the last 2 years, I hear students using these terms again. And I see colleagues, even you to some extent, using these terms again. But this is the problem. We are out of practice in this field. Because for the last 2 generations, we have been told not to use these words. We have lost the awareness of what these words mean. And we have forgotten that for centuries, around these words, there were design theories. There were design strategies. We have to learn again to deal with imitation and style in problematic, critical design terms. We have to engage with imitation and style critically, which, for the time being, with the exception, you, for example, but what I see in general is not happening. What I've seen some people, no names mentioned, but we discussed that in private a few days ago. One office, which I not mentioned, but we can find it out. What they are doing, they build a data set of their own work. They build a latent space which epitomizes the quintessence of their own style. And they use this software to replicate the style of the office agreed to at the beginning. Now, I was wondering which architect would be so dumb as to use someone else's intelligence, never mind artificial, to imitate someone else's style. No, that's worse. To imitate his own style. Who would do that? Now, this is more than, and it's perverse. I mean, it's a good expression of what the technology can do if given a bad task. This happens because we have lost the capacity to conceptualize what imitation and style are, mean, and can do. This, I think, is the challenge of today. This is what the technology is compelling us to do. I did an opinion poll with my PhD students in Bartlett last week. I asked them, discussing the same stuff, using your work as a documentation. I asked my student, give me an idea of what, in your opinion, in 6 months, we shall be doing based on this. Something that in 6 months, we can prove may actually do something in the daily practice And some good ideas came out. So let's continue building. I'm not going to tell you what I do. Give me your first, and then we ask the other.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to unpack in what you just said, Mario. Like this, I took the rest of the night just unpacking what you brought up, which is a lot. But I can tell you, like, one thing is for sure, and this is the experience we all have by now, it's almost impossible to say what's going to happen in 6 months. Because
We got that.
we can do bets, but the progress is so fast and it's difficult to follow. I mean, I read like every week a couple of new papers that are like, oh my God, we can totally use that. That's amazing. We can do this and this with it. And next week it's already obsolete. So the speed is incredible, which is exciting. I mean, for me, these are really exciting times. It's the first time in a very, very long time that I've been feeling that we really push forward in architecture becoming really different, exciting, and very embedded in what our entire world is, not just a little segment of architecture. It's not exclusive. Yeah? It's very inclusive in what it can do. So
It's on TV.
it's on TV, right? Yeah, so it's sorry for TV. And because it's on TV, it's true. And but there are really, it's going to be exciting because what I see right now, and I already talked about this last year. Last year I made the bet that there's going to be millions of architects starting to use Midjourney, be completely obsessed with it for a year or so, or half a year, and then a lot of them are going to drop it again because they're going to be bored about it. But if only like 5,000 architects who started using AI in this way are left that want to discuss the bigger, interesting, important implications of AI, we have a great topics in our history moving forward. And there's like incredible applications we can do for architecture. Like, for example,
Give you one.
yeah,
But first, the biggest one.
the one that I'm at the moment really fascinated with is so-called energy-based models. Yeah. So the cool thing about energy-based models is they can do one thing particularly well, which is prediction. Yeah. And you can do, and I heard a lecture from Jan Nekula about it. Oh my God, we can totally use this in architecture. Imagine, for example, take a piece of paper and just sketch a living room. That's my living room. And then an energy-based model define the rest of the apartment based on information of the environment around that building. And you can tell you exactly where things go and how big they should be and so on. So it's predicting. It's predicting the apartment. And this is just one example. You can do this in every scale. You can do it in the city. Yeah. So, or you can do that with entire landscapes. Yeah. There's two things that AI can do extremely well that people do not discuss enough. One is prediction and the other one is optimization. These are like the two things that AI does all the time. And the funny thing is that it's again similar to the term style in architecture. The way how engineers in computer science talk about optimization is very different to how we as architects talk about optimization, right? So in the terms we're used to in architecture, the sort of German engineering terms like the optimizing the thickness of the steel and the height of the concrete and the composition of the concrete.
Yeah, by the computation, that's a different mean.
Yes, exactly. That's a completely different thing. It's not optimizing towards the goal of engineering terms. It's optimizing towards the goal of, for example, in diffusion model terms, your prompt, right? So it's trying to find in this huge data set what approximates the goal of your prompt the best way, not necessarily the best picture. Yeah. It's very often not the best picture. I mean, we get like a lot of shitty results which I do. Here, if you take that idea and you put it into other models that exist in AI, you can go with things in architecture that are at the same time aesthetically valuable, culturally interesting, but also contribute to sustainability, less use of materials, and so on and so forth. And you can actually combine a cultural agenda with a technical agenda.
Or packaging.
Yes.
That's transferability.
Yeah. I mean, I have to say that the last couple of years were very exciting for me because I learned so much from computer scientists about how they talk and speak in terms they use, which is so different to how we architects talk with the same terms. Yeah.
Which is why they are telling us that we do imitation.
Yes, that's what I mean. But another thing that I learned very much from this community is that we as architects, the architecture community is probably the last community in the world that built things by something like a genius. Yeah, the unique genius.
The idea is that we are like dwarves standing on the shoulders
Of course,
giants.
yes, of course, but it's like one of the problems you're gonna face as architects moving forward with AI is that we still have this mode of thinking in our minds. And I have to keep my
Everything is invented out of nothing.
Yeah.
Creation ex nihilo, which is of course.
I'm not gonna share my data, I'm not gonna share my plans, I'm not gonna share my sections, because this is my intellectual property, and thus I'm gonna keep it to myself. Doesn't help the progress of doing better architecture for using AI, because we're definitely constantly. So architects have not understood it yet, but I'm hopeful that it's going to change at some point.
The idea that the data set creates an extrapolation, which is the source of the endless variations, is the opposite of the idea that we can reinvent the wheel every day. Because the system is going to tell you the wheel has already been invented. You can improve it. Build on what the data set has already provided. But this idea of progress through accretion and accumulation is the opposite of this romantic idea of genius. It's a device and you have an illumination.
Yeah. This is a very romantic idea. It's of course based on this kind of German central romanticism stuff. That yes, it's fun to read, but it's not difficult to read. Sorry.
And engineers prove that things don't work.
Yeah.
And then they try to imitate the function of the human brain, and they become neuroscientists without saying so. They prove that mathematically it works in a different way.
I mean, but there's living elements, and I try to talk about it in my lecture, that we cannot synthesize it. Like, for example, a creative thought, I don't understand how that works in terms of neuroscience. Thus, we cannot do it. Mathematics stuff, we cannot synthesize it.
It's complicated.
Yes,
Let's open the floor.
Yeah.
I have a lot of questions.
I have to change my glasses.
If we go back to your original lesson you gave, you were like, oh, we need to train computers how to think. Let's look at the assembly line. We could teach a robot to build a particular car, but maybe we should just teach robots how to think, or to build every type of car they can learn. What I noticed, though, was that there were no more people on the assembly line. So if you teach a robot how to make architecture, what happens to the architects?
Did you see the most beautiful house in the world?
Sure, but I also know that the internet runs off of like different categories of style and taste, and you can train a computer to appropriate any type of identity of taste and be able to do that as well in a relatively simple fashion, as opposed to a conglomerate of like all of this one particular. There's no one answer for everybody. You've gotten rid of that idea in modernism. Right, so to train them to be in a particular style, right, you make that a relatively easy thing that you've done, which is the mid-century modernism example that you pulled, right? Is that the most beautiful house in the world, but the best mid-century modernist thing? My answer or question is, though, what happens to all of the architects?
Yes. I mean, that's a good question, but I mean, I can tell you one thing that I learned in the meantime is that jobs don't disappear, they change. So what's going to happen to the architects is that our profession will change. It's the same thing that happened already like 30-something years ago when the architects started to change from drawing plans with ink and paper to using a computer. Does it mean the architects went away because of that, because certain tasks were automatized? I don't think so. But I think we need to adapt to the situation, understand that things are going to change now, that we're going to have to work differently as architects than we did until now, but architects are not going to disappear. There's one thing about architects which is quite amazing, and it's very different from most disciplines out there. We are great in synthesizing things, meaning that we have not the perfect knowledge, we're not experts in everything, but we know a little bit about different areas, right? And we're able to take those things and plug them together and create something interesting, innovative, hopefully something that contributes to society or art, if you like. And I think the same is going to happen with AI. It's going to be like us is going to be the ones who are understanding all those different areas that AI is today populating already around us, by the way. AI is already part of your life, want it or not, yeah? But we as architects can start to see the connections between those different elements and how they can contribute to better living. Because at the end of the day, what we are supposed, at least I think, to do as architects is not just about building buildings. It's about providing a better possibility to live. So I think that we need to understand all these different elements that are coming together now in order to move forward as a discipline.
And it's not really the architect, like this contract.
Yeah, that's a different thing.
We were designing architect making them. So we have to retrain the contractors to build that would be my question for you. Like with a house, is there a way to build it in a way that you don't use the traditional contractor, but you actually rethink the way that would be made, right? Like in a way you don't want to now get a traditional, was it in Switzerland, chalet builder to do your.
The funny thing is that, like the example of the robot garden and also the house, the big house, the way that the moment it moved from being this AI project to becoming the construction site, that interface does not exist yet. So you have to still do very traditional things. You have to do normal plans, you have to get the stamps for those plans. So the construction complex, the construction industry is not there yet. It's going to take them a long time. Yeah. But and I think this is going to be probably going on for years now. That maybe architects are going to start using AI to do the designs, but the execution phase is going to be still very traditional because we know that the construction industry is profoundly conservative. It was always like that.
Yeah, they're still behind with where we were in the 90s. That's the builder. You can design whatever you want, but you can't make it easily. Some professions always, some professions disappear. It happens when the civil building was built. Most of the inhabitants were meant to be typists, meaning mostly young ladies who would type on a typewriter. Then they invented a photocopy machine, and that profession disappeared. So, if there's of course, but the fear of the architects is, of course, pervasive and to some extent justified. But I would be more worried if I were an engineer, because not computer science, but the run-of-the-mill engineer who designed and calculates 9 beams or heating, ventilation, air conditioning. This kind of stuff can already be made better, faster, and cheaper by what we use.
You probably can already ask ChatGPT to calculate.
Not now, but perhaps in a few months. But what we do cannot be, yeah, as you were saying, meaning if you do, yeah, and okay, some architects will probably lose their job. It happens. The bad ones also probably never happy.
Maybe two kind of observation questions, which is, so one of you, I think, Matias, you just said to Joseph that this is the same thing that happened 30 years ago. I would actually say that it's not, and it speaks to your kind of proclamation that this is really the first new design thing in the century. But, you know, the change that occurred 30 years ago was really one that first started as representation. Then I would say kind of got material, where people were making all sorts of claims, and some of that kind of get on that, you know, that some of the modeling that was happening in the computer on a material basis. You know, one of you guys said something about simulation, and you know, computer scientists have always done this sort of thing. It strikes me that simulation, there's a question of how we read simulation, right, and how we measure it. That I would say is a little bit more clear, but the same kind of implication of how we measure what we see here. And so I'm not worried about architects either, actually. And I think you know, if you look at like big journey as it progresses, it's getting smarter, right? It's getting better at sort of doing things, and it seems like it's just moving to the middle, right? So there's nothing that anyone here in this room has to worry about. There's larger implications for the rest of the world. But my question is really about measure and how you think that in my mind, it throws everything back to interpretation. Some kind of going back to drawings, because we don't have the kind of measure and materialism that the shift to digital 30 years ago sort of promised us, right? So in some ways, like the way that the kind of is, are we comfortable kind of going backwards?
Yeah. I mean, I would like to say something that also Mario mentioned before. I know Midjourney is everywhere and everyone is seeing it and everyone is working with it, but it's not really a profound, interesting tool for design. Yeah? It's a fun tool. It's a toy. It's a great toy. Yeah? It's entertaining and so on, but it's not a profound method of using AI in design, in my opinion. And to the point of change that you mentioned before, maybe there's another example which might be a little bit better, which is the invention of photography and the fear of the arts to being displaced by it. Yeah? When photography was invented, there were artists out there saying, it's the end of painting, it's done, photography was invented, we're all screwed. Yeah? What happened, what really happened, which is very interesting, is that art responded to the invention of photography by coming up with things like impressionism, expressionism, abstraction. So without photography, no modern art. And it might be similar to what you're experiencing right now. It's not only in architecture like that. I'm pretty sure it's going to be the same for visual arts, music, literature, that we're going to experience how that technology is going to push us, humans, to respond to it by inventing something that we didn't think about before. And this is one thing we can do that AIs cannot do. Yeah? AI cannot invent anything new because it's based on existing data.
Based on history.
Exactly.
But the example of the invention of photography is telling because it was a case of creative distraction. Until the invention of photography, the main talent of the academic painter was the contraction of media perspective. Then a machine was invented which made perspective. And so painters said, we are screwed because our job is going to be taken away. And truth to be told, some painters lost the job, particularly those who were specializing in portraits. If you, around 1860, make your living out of making portraits, you are unemployed. But today we consider that photography is a form of art.
Yes.
And figurative arts are still around.
Yeah.
So
one of those painters, actually, exactly at the time, who basically proclaimed that painting is dead at the production of the ecology, the next thing he did was to ask for a job with the French government. It was called the second, for a job as photographer of Gothic architecture.
who's that? You let it do?
No. It's a painter called the second. He was a painter. He was a painter, and immediately it was clear to him that it makes no sense for him to do painting. He took up photography, went to the French government, and asked for a job to documentation.
Concern invented photogrammetry years later.
Yes.
I think the one we can talk a little bit about what I would say is the fourth element of what was already discussed. We had a discussion of an architect, an artist, construction, elements of AI. What if we talk a little bit about the client? And what I'm thinking in this capacity is that AI moves us towards the expectation being something that is infinitely approachable, the expectation of the client. Right? And this idea of a predictive model being something that moves a conceptualization closer to that, but never really truly achieves the expectation. And I think it was exhibited in your house example here. The expectation of the beautiful house is one thing, and then it becomes more flooded by what experimentation and presentation of imagery supports as an ideal image. Right? But if you flip that model and say that you're not necessarily trying to come from the expectation or achieve the expectation of the client to be an architect, maybe achieve the expectation of the client, how does that change the predictive model? If it is a singularity that you're trying to achieve.
Yeah. You're talking about something which is really dangerous.
That's why I'm asking you.
Yeah, because the problem is that what's going to happen now is that giants are going to start to babble around the Midjourney and come to images to you as an architect. That's what I want. What do you do then?
But I think that goes back to the notion of style. I think this goes back to the notion of style. Like it redefines what culture is. Right? Like style and all of the historic character and imagery is associated with expectations of religion, rituals, or architecture, and a whole bunch of cultural embodiments that were centuries before the manifestation of it as an expression, architecture. So if we invert that same time frame into the sort of future projection, then we should be able to influence the clients in the same way that we influence entertainment, right? Like that image is only an association that we find entertaining to put out there on the internet. But then if we flood the internet with new imagery, kind of positioning of art, what a lot of architects often redefine themselves by flooding themselves with new images of themselves.
Yes. That's something that people have been discussing already, and they actually describe it as internet pollution. It's going to happen for sure. Already.
But I think it will also happen, as we were saying, but due to the rehabilitation of the model of style, people will not be shy in going to an office and saying, I would like to see, I always spoke that anyway, I want to see something similar to what you used to do. What does it mean? I want to see something in the characteristic style of your office. They don't say it in so many words right now. If we are cultivated people who study at the university, we wouldn't use that as term because it's not elegant. But this is probably going to change. And people will not be shy in calling things with the name they always have. After all, you go to an office because you like the style. There is no way to deny that. Even if you use many euphemisms, it's not happening. That was always happening. And I think it is one of the unpredictable results of what computer scientists have been doing, that we are going back to name them. We go to that office because we like the style of them. We like what they have been doing so far. What do all this work have in common? They look similar. What's the similarity? Style. Of course, if a guy is a good architect, with the exception of me and Monroe, actually always made the same thing for his time. You have an architect, but you will not exactly offer to your client a plagiarism of your work, because that's, it's boring. If you are a designer, even if you are a writer, you would like to do something which pleases the client, came to you because you have those expectations. But, it's a normal human acting, but you don't want to repeat it.
Ultimately, I think AI is going to be more and more trainable. And I think ultimately it will be a sketch tool that will be used like we use now software. So I think now it might be the thing where we play with, we get to know, we find out its quirks, but you look at any other software, it will just evolve, become smarter, more trainable, and it will be, I think, the future, in 6 months, not 6 months maybe, but soon, it will be so trainable that we can just sketch with it in ways that we think are now normal with sketching in computer 3D as we are. I remember the 90s when we all thought it was about to roll to Maya, right? I mean, look where we are now. So, it's just going to be, this is the very first version. I think it's just going to be more and more developed and going to be more and more trainable by us. And then once it's so trainable, it will be no different than working in any other way, except for your training in AI to do what you want.
Yeah. I mean,
so there will be a little knob whereby you tweak the formula and you bring in some wacky things.
Or not wacky, like let's say you are in East London, maybe it's still a grid, right? But it doesn't, that's what I mean, it's just
if you're the same knob, you turn it to 0,
but I mean, you're talking, we actually were talking the other day how young the profession of an architect is. For the longest time, it was a craft you learned from a master, and there was the builder architect, that wasn't a word architect, right? You were a master builder. It's very young, the profession of an architect. Then we actually divorced building from designing. That's ridiculously recent.
That's a recent invention.
Yeah.
It's a great comparison.
Yeah, and then in that sense,
We design, we do not do.
But also what is actually happened is the gap, therefore, between design and construction is becoming exponentially wider. Like we are training ourselves faster to move into other versions or other realms of design, whereas construction seems to go ever slower. So it's really interesting because that's why I asked, you know, that what is really interesting is now your house, how do we train other modes of production or other modes of, because I do think, it's not to bring that back to the master builder, but like, because the couples become so large. I think it is an interesting thought to say, maybe we do need to train more other builders, or maybe we do need to get closer to power manufacturing in order to build our residences, so that the precision of the software we're working in is replicated in the way it is constructed.
Yeah. I mean, there's already examples out there of companies that are trying to use AI in construction. So yes, there's things like AI build and so on. But what is more interesting, and it's funny enough, very often the same group of people. There's these guys in Vorarlberg who are like at this amazing woodworking tradition, who were like the first ones to introduce robotic fabrication for wood like 25 years ago, and now are basically training a neural network to scan the wood they're trying to cut in and develop the best possible node they can do with that wood so that it's structurally sound. Yeah.
I saw them, yeah.
So
This is, you know, what our, you know, my builders have to do is the centuries and centuries of training. Meaning, when you have to build a chalet, first you find the good tree, a larch, based on the height of the tree, in the span of the width of the roof, because you cannot bring the timber from elsewhere. So that's, because your part of the Alps is mostly timber, but my part of the Alps is mostly stone. So my people, I'm looking forward to the day when I'm to build a dry stone wall. A robot will scan the horizon, scan the stones, find the best stones, boulders, pick them up, and put them together, minimizing waste, which is what a traditional stone cutter knew how to do through centuries of tacit knowledge. Now, the way to train a computer to do that, 10 years ago, or even 5 years ago, we would have a problem. Today, it's knowledge transfer, imitation learning. So I would build a data set of centuries of stone cutting in the region into the robot. And the robot will learn from example which are the best builders, how to pick them up and not to put them together. And this is zero carbon footprint.
Yes,
You take a stone from there and put it here. It's no carbon. It's no carbon.
There is something that Americans presents called puzzle solvers.
But
Puzzle solvers. So it's a puzzle.
Stones are heavy.
You can solve the puzzle. That's exactly the universal point.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot still.
this may happen. And in fact, I think they are doing something similar, not to build the Blackstone boats, but for emergency relief when there is a landslide. They have to send a robot to pick up the boulders, and the robot is already trained to remove the boulders without problems. So,
I mean, for me, the interesting question really comes up when these things become three-dimensional, and that's what I found, most interesting in the lecture. When you start to merge these two images coming from two directions, and then like through any kind of operations that are 3D. And for me, that's also then fascinating when it becomes trainable in that way, right? And I think to me, that's the challenge, or that's a kind of threshold where things become novel in a new and constantly constructed way, because it's really generating spaces that we might not know what they are.
Mhm.
They might not be useful in our way, but they might be challenging and open up new opportunities. Right now, it's always images, and I think you can read the images, transpose them into 3D or interpret them. But the moment that it becomes like virtually 3D, and then you start to play around with that or train AI for that.
I mean, we actually, at the ARIA laboratory, we're actually working on 3D model datasets. Because if you want to do anything in 3D, you need first a dataset that is in 3D to properly do it, which doesn't really exist. There's a couple of other data sets out there, like that are 3D model data sets, like MeshNet, ModelNet, and so on, but they're useless for architects. That's why, like, most of the papers you see from architects about 3D GANs are chairs or airplanes, because those data sets have chairs for airplanes, but no houses, or not enough of them. So we have collected 10,000 3D models of one family housing projects from all over the world. We have a data set that is detailed enough, big enough to get a result that is viable, not just something that is completely chaotic. So the first step for us architects is to do those data sets, otherwise we can operate in 3D. So my job at the moment is actually acquiring funds from whenever I can get them to get people to build 3D models. But it's going to be at the end be useful, because what we're planning with the lab is that all those data sets are going to be publicly available for every architect to use. That's the only way to do it. Otherwise, we cannot make progress. And hopefully somebody else will be like, yeah, I have another 5,000 models here.
No, building a data set is not a business.
Definitely. Yes.
Big language models are well necessary for every profession. And transferability.
It was similar development in these online worlds or video games, right? Where it was first images and then became, first-person perspective, which more or less still is, right? And then you have Sims perspective, where you have an axonometric view and you really enter the world. I think, I see big parallels in that way. Because that was also flat first, it became perspectival, and then it became more or less three-dimensional, and then opened up to social constellations, which was really interesting, right? In those online worlds. And now,
I mean, there's one thing to
seems
say
like
that,
something
about
similar
is
to
that,
come
sorry, that by now, the knowledge in the architecture discipline about how those systems really work is very minimal. And this leads to a lot of assumptions and a lot of ideas about things that just don't work. Like somebody offered me recently a huge data set that they have of BIM models. They're not used, we cannot use them because they're so dense, they're so detailed that each model is huge, and GPUs need enormous amounts of power to go through 3D. The problem is that once you move from 2D to 3D, the calculation power goes up exponentially, and no one thinks about that, right? So our models that we're optimizing to be used there, every single model we have to give people super specific guidance of how to build the model so they can use it. We actually created even an online automated checker that they could load up the model they made, and the checker would check when it's useful for the data set or not at all. So there's a lot of moving parts here at the moment where there needs to be just more information out there. What I'm happy about is that conferences like Acadia and all of them, this knowledge is getting more. You see more papers about AI, the information is getting out there, but we're in a transition phase.
Don't you think that this quest for the holy grail of 3D AI is kind of, some architects already know how to make 2D images into 3D? It's kind of the basis of our profession.
I completely agree with you. Actually, it's one of the arguments I've made very often, that one of the biggest achievements we ever got as architecture discipline is the ability to think of something in 2D, fold it into a two-dimensional surface, and then unfold it in a large scale, which I think is incredible. Like, intellectually speaking, that is great. But we also have to say that people are just spoiled with 3D models for the last 30 years, and everyone is asking for 3D models.
No, but I think as soon as you get the magic button that makes your mid-journey into 3D, it's going to be a cancer, and everyone's going to.
And that's going to happen.
Well, I mean, yeah, there's a question, right? It's like, if this is, again, moving towards obsolescence of the architect itself, because this is the skill set we built, like I just spending significant investment in time and energy and money to do this, it's like, why should I move myself towards obsolescence? Like, what is to be gained in making everything I just learned
I can tell you
totally obsolete?
I can tell you exactly why. Because if you don't do it, someone else will do it, and you will be out of a job. And this guy's going to make the money.
I mean, once it's happened, we're all out of a job. I mean, like,
No.
No.
This is
That's
such a.
exactly what I said in the 90s.
Yeah.
This whole 3D thing, and when we started animating, things to look at behaviors, right? Behavior, oh wow, behavior. Now we're out of a job. I mean, the amount of times in the 90s we were out of a job, people
Yeah.
who were out of a job, we're actually the ones doing it. So it's the same now, right? Like, Matias is doing it. It's not the butcher or the corner that is figuring out by himself. Right? It's just not because you can't train a network to do, or an AI to do what you know already about architecture, right? So that knowledge you transfer into training an AI, then it becomes ability.
Exactly. I just want to say that the barrier of entry is becoming significantly lower with the AI because it's a
Not
technical.
really, because it's still 2D, right? So
Right,
if
but
you
like
can
as a
trace
visual
Matias-
artist, as a trained visual artist before I came to architecture,
Yeah.
I can say that the complexity of the image that the computer is putting together, I know a lot of visual artists can't operate at that complexity, right? So the assumption is that the AI, as it always gets better, as the computational power always gets better, and as the data sets get better, then the AI itself, like this is now, we've not doing a very good job. 6 months from now, a year from now, 2 years from now, as it moves exponentially through the system, it will do a significantly better job of the design work, and then the production value of like the things that we've just been learned to do, right? So it's
But you did your house through a plan, a section, and then
elevation.
in the pixelation thing, yeah. So the way, that's still not the 3D image,
Yeah.
2D image created in AI. Right?
It's not the best
It's not.
solution, for sure. But I
It's
want
still
to,
kind of
yeah.
traditional.
Yeah, I want to add something which I think is very important, and I forgot to mention that in the lecture because normally I say this in the lecture, that if we as architects do not engage with AI, somebody else will do it for us, and we have no say how this is going to play out for architecture. If we engage with it, and if we accumulate enough knowledge about it, and talk to computer scientists and roboticists and others, we can make it an integral part of architecture. You understand? So it doesn't displace us, it becomes part of our identity as architects using those technologies.
It becomes wonderful.
But if we don't, if we just say, no, I'm not interested, the investors and developers are going to do that, and then we don't. You can do that.
There will always be a market. There will always be a market for the architects who do not want to use any technology.
That can't work. It's something, yes, I agree.
Go for it.
I have a question about, like you talked about, I think to your point too, they were kind of saying that the role that we still have is a lot to do with like synthesis of information. And so the stuff that we still have to do is synthesize all the overfinding, and that's where the personalization comes in. I guess my question is, where do you see it heading in terms of maybe this issue of personal style and trying to synthesize, like, okay, this person has a profile which they're uploading a bunch of images to Midjourney, and they realize this is good for me, but that image isn't good for me. Where do you kind of maybe see it heading to, like, personalization?
That's a good question. So, like, one of the things that is really important to understand is that, and I mentioned this already in different ways today, AI per se cannot do anything new. Yeah? This is something that is profoundly human.
Yeah.
Yeah? Because the strange misfirings that happen in our brain that produce a new idea, we don't know how it works. So thus we cannot do it artificially. And I'm not sure it's going to ever be possible. So we know very little actually about our mind. Yeah, still. So AI can do, it's amazingly good with interpolation. That's exactly what it's doing in Midjourney. It's interpolating between a variety of different images and creating those mashups. So this is great, but really to come up with something that is profoundly different, I don't think I can do that. But on the other hand, I have to say that's also difficult for humans. Yeah? Like a really, really new thought. Yeah? And the reason for that is because we are so trained to put anything we see or read in a frame of reference of things we know, to make it readable for us. It's something that is completely outside the frame of reference. It's even hard for us to understand or to see even. Yeah? So the human ability to see something that is innovative and different and exciting is a quality in itself that is really hard to replicate. Yeah? So I wouldn't be worried about creativity or invention or newness or provocation. I think all those things are very human traits that are not really, you cannot replicate with AI. AI can assist us in finding those, and that I really believe. Yeah. Please.
Yes.
In the robotic garden example, the AI interpret data gathered from the perception of robots to enhance how they interact with architecture. Is there the potential for neural networks to interpret neural data gathered from human sources using like the EEG machine, for example, in a similar manner to enhance how we interact with architecture?
That's an interesting thought. I guess, yes. I'm not entirely sure, but I mean, the thing is that what would be the advantage? It's just a different way of experiencing architecture, right? So you would probably not experience it as a physical object that you're touching or so, but rather as like a dream. Yeah, so you can infuse architectural dreams. Okay, could be interesting.
Yeah, just one thought maybe to wrap up some of the points. And I'm reminded that the engineer Peter Weitzman once said that the difference between what the engineer's role should be in that industry that an engineer imagines, which is to say, he imagines ways of doing things that have not been done before, which is more or less where we spend today's architects with regard to AI, because given that AI is built on things that have been done before, we are here to imagine how this could be done. So I don't think at this point we have anything to fear. And I think there's another aspect that I don't see, maybe I'm wrong, maybe Mark can tell me, I don't see any AI software today taking initiative. There is always the architect at the end having to initiate the process of creativity. We can imagine that maybe this is something to develop for the next generation. Maybe, in the end, it's constantly on waiting to gather enough information, constantly plugged onto many sources, and one day, I have this idea. But so far, imagination and initiative are two things that I see AI kind of not really different. If maybe I know to that, like, how does AI interpret the unknown aspect, right? Does it leave empty the curiosity and the potential potential, or does it just simply keep its art space?
It makes things up.
It makes things up. So it does try to answer from what it's familiar with
Yes.
to a certain capacity.
Like for example, the image I showed about this villa in the Alps, we've had this kind of long windows and cantilevers, and we're saying that it's not clear how it's touching the ground. That's exactly what it made up. It made up how the thing is actually touching the ground, because there was no clear rule of this.
I love you said what was the most beautiful house. The first AI came up with most beautiful, which may be a rose, and then maybe most beautiful form is a curve, and it made this weird curved rose cup with everything. No, that to me was more like a dream or something new and weird than the new version, which shows these Pippi Longstocking
Yes.
houses, which are colonial and like made from wood sticks. And I'm like, wow, really? I mean, that is scarier. I find the first one where you just combine random beautiful things and you make them into something a house. I mean, that was a surprise.
Yeah,
Right? That whole thing is a surprise. It's like, wow, okay. The last one is mortifying, right?
I know.
When you get these like weird houses that are 1 million floors high and have 7,000 coaches.
The data set keeps changing.
Exactly.
And every time that you ask the same question, even if it's 10 minutes later, the data set has changed. It is basically an opinion. When you ask the idea of the dog, what's the ideal dog? What the machine regurgitates back to us is the aggregation of the wisdom of crowds. It is, in a sense, what Wikipedia has been canvassing.
No, I understand it, Mario, but what I'm
saying.
saying is, what was interesting about the first version is it wasn't trying to predict what we would like in architecture. The second version, however, started to have already an opinion on which building or house do people like most. That's not great. What is actually great is if it isn't it doesn't know what we think of architecture and just provides beautiful things.
which he thinks is then, or she. But that's interesting, you know, that's what I mean. The fact is that you can train these guys too much. And then what they do is they start to predict your taste, which is always wrong. The first one was of course absurd, but absurd is interesting because you can interpret it. The second one is closer, probably sadly, to reality, and is like a complete dead end, right? So it isn't like, is this house good or that house bad? The first house was made from different components that were not necessarily architecture. A roof of roses has nothing to do with architecture. It's just a rose is beautiful and a house is maybe beautiful or more beautiful with other beautiful things on top of it. So, but that is interesting. The last one, I think you can overtrain them and it starts to predict taste. You get a real problem if the thing starts to predict taste. So you have to untrain it also, I think.
Did you ask exactly the same question? Because sometimes just a comma can make it. It's a copy. It's really literally
same exact question.
Yeah. It is the same, it was mid-journey in both cases.
Yeah.
How much time between the two queries?
A year or something?
Oh, well, the data set is completely
I
different.
know.
Yeah.
I can tell you like the data set from the first image was 14 million images was the data set. For the second image, 214 million images. So it makes a difference. The training set.
Keep up with those.
Yes, well.
That's really, you know, that's why I'm impressed about our profession.
And if the client is doing it, or whoever, the barrier of entry is participation.
Especially the prefab builders.
Right,
I
yeah.
see it from prefab builders, they're gonna do this stuff.
Okay,
So-
everyone's gonna.
Yeah.
Here's another question then too, like if the algorithm runs long enough, the internet is going to be flooded with mid-journey images that are continuously, you know, so instead of, you know, whatever architecture firm going back and like feeding its, you know, its images to the AI and creating pollution, the mid-journey itself is creating a pollution on the internet, you know, and then at one point does this become mud?
Well, you see, there is actually a job description that came up last year called prompt engineer. And that's definitely going to become part of their job. Is that you are, because it's like with every other tool. Either you're good with the tool or you're bad with the tool. Yeah, you can play violin really badly or you can master it, right? But to master it, you have to train it and you have to practice. It's the same with this thing. You have to, if you're good in Googling, which also not everyone is good in that, yeah, you will have an easier time in creating a prompt that's going to create something that is hopefully interesting, different, innovative. You call it, yeah. But it still needs effort, like with anything else in life, no? It needs effort, yeah. It's not going to happen automatically. By the way, AI does nothing automatically. To your point before, yeah. There's always the human in the loop in those things. It doesn't. Of course, there's patients that offer to generate prompts automatically. It's the most boring stuff that comes out when you use those prompts. Yeah? It's the human imagination. Still, again, human imagination, intuition, genius, if you like, yeah? That is necessary to come up with something that will use the tool to an advantage for you as a designer. But you have to be aware that it takes time, effort, and energy to do so.
And editing.
Yes.
And you still need to select and edit.
Exactly. I talked about I talked about this variation problem, right? That architects are so used to work in variations, and that the ability to create variations in those tools allows you to almost organically work with it as an architect would. But again, I'm actually starting to get tired to talk about mid-journey because I think it's a boring application of AI. But okay, yeah, there's far more interesting things you can do.
And that also,
as the gentleman was saying, that more and more images created by generative AI become part of the data set. And this is problematic because then the statistical reliability or trustworthiness of the aggregation of data feeds on itself. And at that point, the system will we shall have to find a way to disambiguate the real data set from the simulated one.
Well, I mean, it's partly asked for undergraduate computer science to create a tool that can differentiate between organically created images and synthetically created images. Totally possible. No problem.
In
we invented this, it would be more paid.
Of course, that already exists. Like a young student at MIT already did that. Well,
Great, thank you so much, Yvonne.